Hello and welcome to polyplane.com. Today we're going to be talking about UVW. One of the very first videos that I did on this site was called 000. It was an introduction to the idea of coordinates. UVW is very similar to what 000 is, or the X, Y, and Z axes. As a matter of fact, if you look at X, Y, and Z, it's pretty safe to say that X equals U, Y equals V, and Z technically equals W. The only difference is you're using U, V, and W to express points on a surface. So they're reference points just like X, Y, and Z are, only they're relative to the surface that you're working on. So let's take a look at this. So here I have a surface. It's on our X, Y, and Z planes in the world space. And it kind of, it swoops down and comes up and everything. And if we wanted to determine a specific point on this surface, we could do it using X, Y, and Z coordinates. So if I select my polyline here and I select on this surface here, and I select on this point here and drag out, the beginning of this point right here is technically in X, Y, and Z space. But you could also define it by a set of points that's actually on the surface. So if we look at a surface as just a floating grid, it becomes really easy to determine points on that grid. So in essence, U and V are just simply X and Y on a surface. There's a few really useful purposes for being able to define coordinates are on U and V and W. Now, when you're working with texture mapping, you're not really going to use W that often. W is reserved for more unfolding of surfaces in non-traditional ways. There's a video link down below from Gorilla CG on the site here. They do an excellent job talking about UV mapping, so I'm gonna skip that part for now. When you're talking about modeling, you can actually use U and V to define additional points on your surface. So if I type insert not and I select my surface, in Rhino you can define additional control curves. So you can see this curve that's sort of carrying itself across the surface, and it's doing so in one particular direction, and it's doing that in the U direction because U, remember, is similar to X. Now the cool thing is, if I were to rotate this surface arbitrarily, the U direction would ride parallel to the surface's edge because that's its reference point. Right now the line is traveling in the U direction. I can change this by coming up here to direction, clicking on V, and now it'll go this direction. Now it's a really nice additional feature in the new version of Rhino 5, where whatever direction you're in, those lines become highlighted a different color. In this case, they're white versus black. And if I take this and I can actually make it both, so now I can have that additional point be wherever I want it to be, and it'll add additional kinks into my surface here. Now, when I turn on my control points for this surface, you can see additional lines have been drawn on there, and I can actually then grab those and pull them up and disrupt the surface and add in additional geometry. So the U and V coordinates are really nice because you can actually define coordinates within a system of a surface. So if I rotate this arbitrarily and I type insert not again, bring the direction back to U, you can see that the U is still relative to the surface's edge, so those coordinates are now moving with the surface. You may or may not use the UV reference points when you're modeling, but it's an additional set of coordinates for you to use for when you're adding geometry onto something. But more than likely, if you're in Rhino to begin with, you're probably going to be working in X, Y, and Z. But you may hear it when you're working. You may hear people talking about U and V coordinates and that sort of thing. And now you have a little bit of a better reference point of what they're talking about. It's just a set of coordinates relative to your surface. So hopefully you'll find some use for that. Now, in the case of displacement, if I were to apply a displacement to this, that displacement is actually being generated from the W direction. So this number right here, the white point, that one is the W in the UVW. So if I make this point 5, so we'll say point, and I preview that, it's going to be less intense, but it's actually referring to the W direction because, again, remember that coordinate is relative to your surface. Now with something like a box or any other primitive for that matter, its UV is going to be relative to the entirety of the object itself. So it's really nice in Rhino. They've actually implemented this thing called the UV editor So I can define a plane here on my grid, and this corresponds to my object. So now I can click on this, and it's telling me where each of these coordinates is relative to. Now it's a little bit still, in my opinion, in a beta. The way that this box is unwrapping itself on this UV map is not proportional to what's actually happening. So like if I take a sphere, take my UV editor, clearly it's hard to understand what's happening with the sphere in that case. You can use a texture, so the UV grid texture will tell you exactly how that's unwrapping itself. We can get into the baking of textures in another video, but you can see that it'll show you like where each one of these numbers is. So 43 is right there, 53 is right there, and you can, if you were to edit this image that has the numbers on it, it would update on the sphere itself, and you could sort of get an idea of where those numbers are located. But I think that the UV mapping in general in Rhino is still a little bit beta. I would recommend moving to like ZBrush or 3D Max if you want to get into that. But anyway, for individual surfaces and that sort of thing, understanding how the UV coordinates work can really help you with your workflow, especially when you're needing to start to apply displacements and inserting kinks and knots and that sort of thing. So, all right guys, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.